Okay, now we are going on. We have a good speaker now, again, and he came all the way from Shanghai. You probably know him because he is the co-founder and CEO of BTCC. Maybe you heard about this company. It's the first Bitcoin exchange in China, and now still is one of the top exchanges around the world. And he is also a board member of Bitcoin Foundation. And maybe if you heard about Litecoin, his younger brother of Charlie Lee as well. So a big round of applause for Bobby Lee.
Yes.
The stage is yours. If we have some time, we may do like a quick conversation at the end.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Any people holding Bitcoin here? Any people who doesn't have Bitcoin, raise your hand. All right, just a few. All right, so I'm here to talk about Bitcoin digital currencies. I'm going to sort of go back in history and take a step back and really explain why Bitcoin is revolutionary, how it's different, okay? I know in recent days and months and weeks, there's been a lot of talk about ICOs and tokens, investing, speculation, and all that. But I'm going to take us back to the basics of digital currency and digital assets, okay? So it turns out, and I've been in this sort of sector for the last 7 years. I've got first exposed to Bitcoin through my brother, Charlie, and this was in 2011. So it's been 7 years now. And over the last 7 years, I've had a lot of time to think about why this is different, why this is new. And it comes down to ownership. It turns out digital currencies, digital asset, it's actually a new kind of ownership. So let's take a look at how ownership is today. Today, ownership is actually by title. For the most part of all your assets, your personal wealth, all the big ticket items, the real estate, the stocks, the bonds, the money in your bank account, it's actually all owned by you by title, meaning that it's owned through identity and it's tied to your ID, to your name, to your person, to your passport, national ID, and so on. Is that right? So that's how society is today. And that's not always the case, because in human history, for the last few thousand years, it turns out in the early days, ownership was not by title, but rather by physical possession. We're talking about the gold and silver. We're talking about the accessories, the tools, whatever you have on you, the clothes, and so on. Even today, small things you still own by possession. The eyeglasses, the shirts that you're wearing, right? If you have red wine collections or fine art. But the big things, real estate, homes and cars, if you have automobiles and airplanes, boats, those are all owned by title. So why did that change? Well, it's because for larger things like real estate, you cannot physically hold the home. Unless you're really rich and powerful, you have a castle, you can actually afford to hire guards to guard your castle. So that's why with society, with government, with enforcement, you can hold things by title. So it turns out the financial system today is very much all ownership by identity. So whether it's online accounts, whether it's PayPal in the Western world, in China it's Alipay, WeChat Pay, Venmo, and all these payment systems are all tied to ID. Even the point systems, the digital point system like airline miles, hotel reward points. If you stay in this hotel, you might get hotel reward points. Airlines issue miles. All those are all tied to identity. So the point is that I'm trying to make is that today's world, the vast majority of assets, almost 95% or more, are owned by identity. What's wrong with that? Well, it turns out whenever things are owned by identity, there is always a third party involved. And the reason is the third party has to judge whether you are who you are. Have you ever walked into a bank but didn't bring your bank card or did not bring your ID, and they ask you for your ID and you cannot get your money out? You may not have, but I have. I've certainly walked to a bank without bringing my passport, and then they won't let me get my money out because I cannot prove to them that I am who I am. Right? I know who I am. They don't believe me. Well, I'll have to bring my passport next time. And this is a photo of a bank queue in Cyprus. So this is like 5 years ago at this time. There was a run on the bank. And the reason is that because the money, anyone from Cyprus here? If you remember this, because your money was in a Cyprus bank and the government had a budget crisis, they decided to take money from the banking system. And they unilaterally decided at one point, their idea was anyone who had bank deposits of over 100,000 euros would get a haircut of 20%. They thought that, hey, if you have more than 100,000 euros, you must be rich. You probably don't mind the government taking 20% of your money. Well, that did not go over too well. So long lines to get money out. And this is the first Bitcoin sort of mini bubble in April of 2013 when Bitcoin went from $20 to $165, $265. So the point is that whenever something has identity, there's always a third party involved. And it's good in many cases. For example, when I was living in the United States, my car actually got stolen in San Francisco. And after it got stolen, 2 days later, the police found it, and then they returned the car back to me because the car was actually registered in my name. So thankfully, in that case, things that are registered in your name, whether it's real estate or cars, can be returned back to you because there's a government law enforcement system and so on. But when it comes to cryptocurrency, that's why it's different. So the point is that your money is actually not your money if there's a third party in control. Even the paper money you have in you, in your wallet, the paper money you have, whether it's US dollars, whether it's euros, whether it's Turkish lira, this money is actually not your money. The paper is always yours. You can always keep it. But the value is not yours because the value is actually given to you by the government, by the central bank. So many examples, whether it's old Deutschmark after World War II, if you still have those, they're worthless now, other than collector's value. Even more recently, we have about 10 years ago in Zimbabwe, in Africa and Zimbabwe, those money went through hyperinflation and the value got lost. And then more recently, of course, India, a year and a half ago, the 500 and the 1,000 rupee notes got canceled arbitrarily overnight. And of course, from Venezuela, the 100 bolivar note also got canceled. And not just third world or developing countries, but also first world countries. Anyone from the UK here? Yes, British? So your £5 note, the old one, just got canceled. Right? So the press doesn't make a big deal out of it. They think that's normal. But if you actually hold on to those, they're going to be worthless, right? And I think the £10 note is happening, same thing. So in China, they just recently canceled a series of old renminbi notes as well. They're going to cancel that on May 1st. But the point is that your money is not your money when a third party is in control of it because it's tied to identity. So what's next? Well, what's next is ownership by information. And this is where Bitcoin comes into picture. Ownership by information is not ownership by physical possession. It's not ownership that's tied to identity, but rather it's ownership because you have the information. And of course, I'm talking about the private key. So the key invention, the really crux of Bitcoin's invention is that now we can actually have information-based assets. And this is what we talk about, digital assets. And the future is here today. So digital assets are a way for you to have ownership of real tangible value through possession of information. So for those of you who raise your hands, who have Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, many of you do, right? So let's put aside the tokens first, the ICO tokens, put that aside first. Ethereum, Bitcoin, Litecoin, and so on. Do you actually have ownership of the private keys? If you do, then you actually own it. If you don't, because you have a third-party company that has custody over your assets, that's a third-party relationship, okay? So back to Bitcoin. Invented in 2009, you know this history. The white paper was in 2008. And of course, it's a brand new class of asset, digital asset. And I'm going to go through the highlights. Number one is it's limited to 21 million. So it solves the double spend problem and is limited in terms of issuance. We all know that. And it's only based on information and math, meaning we're not trusting a third party to guarantee the value of my Bitcoin. Rather, I'm trusting mathematics. I'm trusting that 1 + 1 will always equal to 2 in whatever language, whatever culture, it's always like that. And then, of course, the actual mathematics, cryptography in Bitcoin is actually more complex than simple, 1 + 1 = 2. But concept is the same, okay? And then it's borderless and global. This means that any asset in Bitcoin is already global. There's no notion of Bitcoins being in Turkey, Istanbul, versus being in China, versus being in the EU region, versus being in the United States. Any Bitcoin you have is technically in the cloud, in the Bitcoin network, in the cloud, the blockchain. And it's global, so it crosses all geographic, cultural, language barriers. It doesn't matter if you're old, young, if you're male, female, if you're a child or not. And of course, it's not identity-based. We talked about Bitcoin being pseudo-anonymous. It doesn't matter if it's pseudo-anonymous or real anonymous. The point is it's not based on your identity. That means your pets, your dogs and cats can own Bitcoin. That means my computer itself can own Bitcoin because it has the private keys and so on. And because, this is the more key point of the slide, because Bitcoin is not identity-based, there is no third party required. So there's no third party to authenticate, to allow you, to disallow you to move funds between Bitcoin accounts. Okay, so you know this already, but the insight I want to really drill into everyone is information. Think of digital information in ones and zeros. In the end, you have Bitcoin addresses like this, and this is an account number. We all know this, very long number. But the key thing is, who owns that Bitcoin account? You might think I do, because I have it on my slide. But the moment I show you this next part of the slide, which is a private key, now I've shared with you the so-called password, the private key for that Bitcoin account. Right? If you're fast, you can take a photo of it. Some of you already have. And essentially, I'm sharing with you the wealth of my account. And in fact, right before I got up here on stage, I'm giving you $100 just by showing you this image. For those of you who are fast and technical, you can go get your $100 from this QR code. Really. There's $100 of value in this Bitcoin account. And this is the new economy. We can give money to each other just by showing you a QR code, or in more old school fashion, I could just blink to you using Morse code, right? We're talking about ownership of value through information. And this is what's the ultimate holy grail, because this is not censorable, right? Unless you censor free speech, unless you censor communication, with Bitcoin and digital assets, the world can now transact with each other with no third party. Okay, can I move on? You want to take a photo? Many of you are already too late because probably someone already has the $100. Anyone got it? You got it? You got the $100? All right, good for you. Now I can buy coffee for everyone else after. Okay, good. I've given out over $1,400 through that QR code. Okay, so let's recap. Bitcoin is at the end of this evolution of ownership, which started by physical ownership to identity-based ownership and to now information ownership. Okay? So for those of you who pay attention to this slide, people ask me, why is that guy walking off the edge of the cliff? He's going to fall over. Well, the point is, if it's digital, it's information, there's nothing to fall over because it's no longer bound by the rules of gravity. Okay? So to me, this is the core essence of Bitcoin, is that we are dealing with a new asset class that is purely digital, purely information only. This is not digitized asset class. This is a pure native digital asset class that has value, not because it's backed by someone else, some government, not because it's backed by some other asset class, but it's pure digital, and the value of it is in its qualities. The qualities of it being limited to 21 million, of it being global and borderless, of it being digital with no third-party control, and being not tied to identity. So you can still lose it if you lose it private key, but you could also share it like I did earlier. Okay, so that's the that's my prepared remarks. Arda, do you have any? You want to come chat with me? Do you take some audience questions?
Yeah, great. Let's do that. So we still have some time. Do you want to take a seat or?
Sure. Let's sit down.
Yeah. First of all, Bobby, it's really great having you here. I'm really happy that you made it in such a short notice.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. And do you have any questions, first of all? Because we still have like 5 minutes, so maybe we can get some questions. Or I will ask the questions. You have one question over there? Yeah. Mikrofon verebilir miyiz arkadaşlar? Oh, I spoke Turkish, sorry.
Do you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
My name is Yasin Simşek. I'm a lawyer, international lawyer in Turkey, and also very interested in that ownership thing and third-party control. So you said information is not involved third-party or third parties, right? So we could say information is controlled by some others. And how could you say the info and the ownership is not or will not be affected by third parties? And we can see in the developments of Bitcoins and up and downs, and also the federal governments or federal, the federal bank.
Central banks, right?
Central banks are also devaluing the Bitcoins, and also everything, the system of the internet might also will affect the Bitcoin's value. So how could you say it's not involve the third party?
So Bitcoin, has been around for many years. There's a lot of exchanges, banks, and regulation around that. All that involves a lot of people, companies, governments, regulatory agencies, your friends, all that stuff. So there's a lot of third parties involved. But my point is that when you own Bitcoin, the essence of it is that you have control of that private key, which you yourself generated the private key on a device that you trust. So in that sense, your ownership of it does not involve a third party certifying that you own the Bitcoin. Your ownership of the Bitcoin, you know yourself because you have the private key. And you don't need to expose the private key to anyone else to prove that you own it. The mathematics allow for you to cryptographically sign a message or to move the funds just by utilizing the private key without actually disclosing the private key. So that's what I mean by the ownership model does not involve third parties. But everything else involves third parties. If I use a Bitcoin to buy coffee, to pay for lunch, that involves third parties. Because the coffee and I don't have the relationship. I pay the vendor the money and the vendor gives the coffee to me. Or the vendor and I might even use a third-party payment processor to transact the Bitcoin. So that may involve third parties. So that's not the issue here. Does that answer a little bit your question?
Third party that we meant together, but what I mean, the system also, the weakness or the strength of the system will also affect, and who controls that system, and the governments or the other third parties who create this maybe cloud-based systems or the cloud, even Microsoft is also will become the bigger company in the world because of the cloud management systems. So how could you say this will not be affected by the systems who owns them?
I think, I'm sorry, I don't fully understand your question. Do you? If not, I'm happy to take your question offline. Maybe after this talk, come find me and
yep,
I'll talk to you.
He's gonna be here, so it's gonna be easy because it's more gonna be like.
Basically, what I mean, this Bitcoin, designed on online system, okay, and online system is also owned by some others, and those others is also third party. That's what I meant.
You're talking about the internet being owned by some people, the computers.
Yeah.
Well.
So let's get one more question.
Okay.
Here's someone.
Yeah.
We have like 2 or 3 minutes.
Go ahead.
So.
Hi, Selahattin Urfali, I'm an investor. You said you came from China, Shanghai, right?
Yeah.
So as somebody from Bitcoin Foundation in Shanghai. I have two questions. What did you feel when China government when China government start these bans, and why China government didn't use the way of US instead of regulating the system very quickly? They put a big ban on it and try to cover you guys. Thank you very much and welcome.
Yeah, let me tell you quickly. So you're referring to the ban that happened in September of 2017. What I felt, well, at the time I felt that's too bad. Essentially what happened was, if you remember, in August, June, July, August of 2017, last summer, there was a huge ICO craze in China. So all along, China was on the edge of whether or not to formally regulate Bitcoin. I think early last year, at this time 1 year ago, China was actually about to formally, openly regulate Bitcoin and issue licenses to exchanges like ours, BTC China. Unfortunately, their mood changed in May, June. Around May and June, the regulators changed their mind. They thought that, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this. The ICO is getting out of control, and afterwards, by late August, I think they figured it out. They're gonna stop and request all exchanges stop serving business. So that's what happened on September 4th. They issued the regulation that says, you know, it's very anti-ICOs, but they also put in all the cryptocurrencies with it. So they disallowed the trading, the public market trading of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and ICO coins in all of China. So all the exchanges, including ours, we had to stop by end of October, essentially, end of September.
So one quick question, because we have like 1 minute. I really want to get your opinion about like central banks around the world. What do you think will happen in terms of cryptocurrencies, and what's going to be their next move, or are they going to be using it, or what?
Yeah,
because you're really into that.
So central banks, as many of you have been following the news, many countries, or several countries, are now looking into the central banks themselves issuing a digital currency. Right, so that's the topic. I think it's very interesting. Now, what I remind people, and it goes back to the slides I showed you earlier, you have to ask yourself the question, or rather the central bank has to ask this question. Do they want the so-called digital currency accounts to be anonymous, or do they want it to be tied to identity? It comes down to that simple question. If they, and I'm guessing they want it tied to identity. That's my guess. I have yet to hear a central bank offer to give out or to issue a truly anonymous digital currency. And the reason, it's a very important distinction, because in order for the user to be able to generate their own accounts, in order for that to happen, it has to be not tied to identity. And the opposite is true. If the central banks want the accounts to be tied to identity, then by definition, the account numbers have to be assigned, or they have to be approved. There's no getting around that. So if the accounts are assigned, then essentially they have the backdoor key, the master key to your account. So in the end, your money is not your money. Your money is just assigned to an account that has your name on it. And if you've been declared a terrorist or some evil person, they put you in jail, they'll just confiscate the money in your account. So it comes back down to that. So my prediction is most central banks, or maybe even all, will issue digital currencies that are in so-called identity-based accounts. And in that sense, it's not truly freedom of digital currency. It's not a true free digital asset.
When do you expect this to happen? Is there a time frame for that?
They're talking about it. I mean, you know, China, I think, talked about it recently. They'll do something. I think some of the countries are. But it comes back down, if a country truly wants to issue a non-identity-based digital currency, they could do it. And they could even let their hands off of it. And then you ask, why issue a new one? Why not just embrace an old one? It's like saying, oh, a central bank says, oh, gold is good, but I'm going to create my new element, a new metal, a new atomic, you know, that's different than gold, so I could use that as a store of value. But it's like, people are using gold now. Why would you want to create a new element, a new metal, you know, hybrid? To use as store of value. So it's kind of silly. It's kind of like, I think the SDR is kind of like, you know, the IMF SDR. We'll see if that lasts.
Actually, we are gonna go for a break now, but if you have one last question, I can get that, or you have. Here you go.
It pays to sit in front.
No, because we found you, we have you here.
Yes.
I don't want to lose this opportunity, so I want to get as much questions as I can.
Hi.
Even if I'm having your free time, sorry for that, but I think you want to hear more as well.
Hi, Yılında from Vera Ventures. So my question is about your last comment on that identity versus identity about the ownership. So that part, do you think that the governments or the other bodies or the institutional money even will give up on that concern? The anti-money AML, the know your customers. So if you don't tie it to identity, so that threat is always there. So how are you?
Yeah,
so
I'll say something controversial. I don't mind saying it. The whole point about AML, the whole point about KYC, know your customer, is for the purpose of AML, anti-money laundering. So it turns out the world we live in today, the modern society, money laundering is illegal by law. In many countries, in most countries. I actually have a controversial perspective, which is I'm thinking to myself now that maybe that's not the right thing. Maybe it's not right to criminalize money laundering. I challenge you to think about this. We take it for granted that money laundering is evil and it's illegal. But why? Maybe it's done because in the old days, governments had their hands on all the bank accounts and all the information, all the assets. That's why they can enforce AML. But the future world that we live in, where everyone can have money, where people can give money to each other just by blinking, by sending text messages, by showing QR codes, it's impossible to enforce anti-money laundering. So I challenge the politicians and the regulators to rethink, is money laundering something you still want to waste time and waste energy and resources enforcing, or just let it go and really catch the criminals for the criminal activity itself? Right? Because today money laundering, did I just launder money? Maybe I did. Right? When I go to the airport or a bank and I say, here's $100, I want to change for smaller bills. If I do it at a restaurant, is that money laundering? If I change one 100 bill to 520s, or if I give you 520s and make it 100, technically that's money laundering, just at a small scale. If I do it for 10,000, 1 million, certainly that's money laundering. Right? So that's why I'm not endorsing or saying that criminal behavior is good. I'm just saying that the money laundering aspect, because it's going to be impossible to catch in the future, you might as well not worry about it. That's sort of my thinking. I know it's very controversial. Thank goodness they don't put me as a regulator.
Question. One last question then, okay, because we are really out of time. There are more. One over there and then I'll get yours.
Evet.
But just
Ses-
one sentence please, just direct question.
Murat Çeliksoy, ben Ankara'dan geliyorum. Türkçe soracağım. Arda Bey o konuda yardımcı
I can
olsanız çok
translate,
sevinirim. Şimdi
Ama
blockchain...
zor kelimeler kullanma da zorlamayayım.
Tamam. Blockchain Bitcoin'le beraber paranın sahipliği, merkezi yönetimleri, merkezi otoriteleri ciddi anlamda sallamış görünüyor.
Ciddi anlamda, in a serious manner. Evet.
Şimdi bu paranın...
Abi gözünü seveyim, hızlı bir soru
Tamam.
oğlum. Sorry for
Paranın sahipliği
güzel
önemli bir enstrümandı. Bu tarafı ciddi anlamda yıktı blockchain. Diğer para hususundaki diğer önemli bir enstrüman da faiz. Bu dijital paralar babında faizi bypass edecek herhangi bir çalışma var mı bu dünyada? Onu
He's asking like blockchain and like cryptocurrencies, they really bypassed the owning of the money. I mean like physically owning the money. And he's now asking, do you think cryptocurrencies, there's also one thing which is important, that interest rates, for example, in like normal analog currencies.
Yeah.
So he's asking, do you think blockchain and cryptocurrencies will really bypass the interest rates in the financial system?
I've done a lot of research into the current money system that pays interest, the banks that pay interest. And recently, it's very low interest. I think it's all a scam. I think banks can give you interest because they can just print more money. And banks can insure your money in the banks, you know, deposit insurance, because they can just print more money. Right? So I think, and before this, you know, the world, in the days of gold and silver, you know, it wasn't interest. It was actually, if you actually lend it to someone, you can't have interest and have the safety of insurance at the same time. When you have both, something's wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the existing system, they've figured out by giving you both, they have everyone's like very happy. And then they have a society that's under control. And I think that's what's happening. But with this new advent of digital currencies, where it's limited to 21 million, and where it's a true asset that people can have without requiring a third party, I think it's going to challenge the banking system. It's going to challenge the monetary system. It's not going to replace it, but I think it's going to challenge the system. And this may take 20 years. You know, I'm glad we're young. I think we're going to see it. We're going to see it happen, where one day people will lose trust in paper currencies, in national fiat currencies, and even central banks will go to digital assets as a reserve store of value, as a reserve currency. So central banks today hold US dollars, they hold US Treasury bonds, they hold gold, but none of them hold Bitcoin. I think very soon, in the next 5-10 years, we'll see central banks hold Bitcoin as a core of their government reserves, central bank reserves.
I'm going to have one last question from you, but you're not going to be mad at me because I already had your 10 minutes from your break and you're going to be here on time, okay? Promise? So I'm getting the question. Okay, thank you. One more question. Microphone here.
Second row.
Second row.
Glasses, yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm just going to get one question. Sorry for that, but he's going to be around here, so you can always catch him up.
You said money laundering shouldn't be a crime or shouldn't be regulated or something like that. But the main case is tax avoidance. How about that?
How about what?
Tax avoidance.
So I'm obviously pro-government taxation. I think for society to function, government is appointed by the people, and then the government needs the resources to help enforce the rules and so on in society. They need revenue, and I think taxation is the way to go about it. So it's true that with cryptocurrencies, people can avoid taxes in the current form. I think tax rules and legislation just need to be updated so that things are taxed at the point of sale and so on and so forth. Otherwise, I'm not against taxation. I'm not for tax evasion, right? I pay my taxes. I pay my taxes on cryptocurrency sales. I think people should do the same. It's just that some people who choose to evade taxes, they're committing a crime. I think that's not good.
Bobby Lee, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for
thank you.